The Octave of Jealousy, from Miss Bracegirdle and Others, by Stacy Aumonier. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Michael Maggs. The Octave of Jealousy. 1. A tramp came through a cutting by old Jerry Shindle's nursery, and, crossing the stile, stepped into the glare of the white road. He was a tall, swarthy man with stubbly red whiskers, which appeared to conceal the whole of his face, except a small portion under each eye, about the size of a 2-shilling piece. His skin showed through the rents in a filthy old black-green garment, and was the same colour as his face, a livid bronze. His toes protruded from his boots, which seemed to be home-made contraptions of canvas and string. He carried an ash stick and the rest of his worldly belongings in a spotted red and white handkerchief. His worldly belongings consisted of some rags, a doorknob, a portion of a foot rule, a tin mug stolen from a workhouse, 6 date stones, a small piece of very old bread, a raw onion, the shutter of a camera, and 2 empty matchboxes. He looked up and down the road as though uncertain of his direction. To the north it curved under the wooded opulence of Crawshay Park. To the south it stretched like a wide ribbon across the bold vista of shadeless downs. He was hungry, and he eyed critically the potential possibilities of a cottage standing back from the road. It was a shabby little 3-roomed affair, with fowls running in and out of the front door, some washing on a line, and the sound of a child crying within. While he was hesitating, a farm labourer came through a gate to an adjoining field, and walked toward the cottage. He, too, carried property tied up in a red handkerchief. His other hand balanced a steel fork across his left shoulder. He was a thick-set, rather dour-looking man. As he came up, the tramp said, "Where's this road lead to, mate?" The labourer replied brusquely, "Pondhurst." "How far?" 3½ miles. Without embroidering this information any further, he walked stolidly across the road and entered the garden of the cottage. The tramp watched him put the fork down by the lintel of the door. He saw him enter the cottage, and he heard a woman's voice. He sighed, and muttered into his stubbly red beard, "Lucky devil." Then, hunching his shoulders, he set out with long, flat-footed strides down the white road which led across the downs. 2. Having kicked some mud off his boots, the labourer, Martin Crosby, said to his wife, "Dinner ready?" Emma Crosby was wringing out some clothes. Her face was shiny with the steam and the heat of the day. She answered petulantly, "No, it isn't. You'll have to wait another 10 minutes. The taters aren't cooked. I've had enough to do this morning, I can tell you, what with the washing and Lizzie screaming with her teeth and the boiler going wrong." "Is that as something?" Martin knew there was no appeal against delay. He had been married 4 years. He knew his wife's temper and mode of life sufficiently well. He went out into the garden and lighted his pipe. The fowls clucked around his feet, and he kicked them away. He, too, was hungry. However, there would be food of a sort, in time. Some greasy pudding and potatoes boiled to a liquid mash, piece of cheese, perhaps. Well, there it was. When you work in the open air all day, you can eat anything. The sun was pleasant on his face, the shag pungent and comforting. If only old Emma weren't such a muddler. A good enough piece of goods when at her best, but always in a muddle, always behind time, no management. Then resentful because things went wrong. Lizzie, 7 months old and 2 teeth through already, and another coming. A lovely child, the spit and image of what her mother must have been. Next time it will be a boy. Life wasn't so bad, really. The gate clicked, and the tall figure of Ambrose Baines appeared. He was dressed in a corduroy coat and knickers, stout brown gaiters, and square-thick boots. Tucked under his arm was a gun with the 2 barrels pointing at the ground. He was the gamekeeper to Sir Septimus Letter. He stood just inside the gate and called out, "Morning, Martin." Martin replied, "Morning. I was just passing. The missus says you can have a cooking or so of run of beans if you want some. We've got enough already, and I hear as yours is blighty." "Oh, aye, thank ye." "Middling hot to-day?" "Aye, terrible hot." "When'll you be coming?" "I'll stroll over now, nowt to do. I'm waiting dinner. I s'pects it'll be an half-hour or so, you know what them is." He went inside and fetched a basket. He said nothing to his wife, but rejoined Baines in the road. They strolled through the cutting and got into the back of the gamekeeper's garden, just inside the wood. Martin went along the row and filled his basket. Baines left him and went into his cottage. He could hear Mrs. Baines singing and washing up. Of course they had had their dinner. It would be like that. Mrs. Baines was a marvel. On 1 or 2 occasions Martin had entered their cottage. Everything was spick and span and done on time. The 2 children always seemed to be clean and quiet. There were pretty pink curtains and framed oleographs. Mrs. Baines could cook, and she led the hymns at church, so they said. Even the garden was neat and trim and fruitful. Of course their runner beans would be prolific, whilst his failed. Mrs. Baines appeared at the door and called out, "Morning, Mr. Crosby." He replied gruffly, "Morning, Mrs. Baines." "Middling hot?" "Aye, terrible hot." She was not what you would call a pretty attractive woman, but she was nutty, competent, irrepressibly cheerful. She would make a shilling go as far as Emma would a pound. The cottage had 5 rooms, all in a good state of repair. The roof had been newly thatched. All this was done for him, of course, by his employer. He paid no rent. Martin had to pay 5 shillings a week, and then the roof leaked, and the boiler never worked properly. Perhaps that was Em's fault. He picked up his basket and strolled towards the outer gate. As he did so, he heard the 2 children laughing, and Baines's voice joining in. "Some people do have luck," Martin murmured, and went back to his wife. 3. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. It was very pretty the way Winnie Baines sang that, balancing the smaller boy on her knee and jerking him skyward on the last word. Not what the world would call a pretty woman, but pretty enough to Ambrose, with her clear skin, kind motherly eyes, and thin brown hair. Her voice had a quality which somehow always expressed her gentle and unconquerable nature. "She's too good for me," Ambrose would think at odd moments. "She didn't ought to be a gamekeeper's wife. She ought to be a lady with carriages and comforts and well-dressed friends." The reflection would stir in him a feeling of sullen resentment, tempered with pride. She was a wonderful woman. She managed so well, she never complained. Of course, so far as material necessities were concerned, there was enough, and to spare. The cottage was comfortable and reasonably well furnished, so far as he could determine. Of food there was abundance. Game, rabbits, vegetables, eggs, fruit. The only thing he had to buy in the way of food was milk from the farm and a few groceries from Mr. Mead's shop. He paid nothing for the cottage, and yet he would have liked to have made things better for Winnie. His wages were small, and there were clothes to buy, all kinds of little incidental expenses. There never seemed a chance to save, and soon there would be the boys' schooling. In spite of the small income, Winnie always managed to keep herself and the children neat and smart, and even to help others, like the more unfortunate Crosbys. She did all the work of the cottage, the care of the children, the mending and washing, and still found time to make jam, to preserve fruit, to grow flowers, and to sing in the church choir. She was the daughter of a piano tuner at Bladestone, and the glamour of this early connection always hung between Ambrose and herself. To him a piano tuner appeared a remote and romantic figure. It suggested a world of concerts and theatres and bohemian life. He was never quite clear about the precise functions of a piano tuner, but he regarded his wife as the daughter of a public man, coming from a world far removed from the narrow limits of the life she was forced to lead with him. In spite of her repeated professions of happiness, Ambrose always felt a shade suspicious, not of her, but of his own ability to satisfy her every demand. Sometimes he would observe her looking round the little rooms, as though she were visualizing what they might contain. Perhaps she wanted a grand piano, or some inlaid chairs, or embroidered coverings. He had not the money to buy these things, and he knew that she would never ask for them. But still it was there, that queer, gnawing sense of insecurity. At dawn he would wander through the coppices, drenched in dew, the gun under his arm and the dog close to his heel. The sunlight would come rippling over the jewelled leaves, and the little clumps of primroses and violets would reveal themselves. Life would be good then, and yet somehow it was not Winnie's life. Only through the children did they seem to know each other. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. "Oh, Ambrose!" The other boy was pulling at his beard when Winnie spoke. He pretended to scream with pain before he turned to his wife. "Yes, my dear?" "Will you be passing Mr. Mead's shop? We have run out of candles." "Oh, right be, my love. I'll be nigh there afore sundown. Have to order seed from Mr. Crumbling's." It was later than he expected at Mr. Meads's shop. He had to wait whilst several women were being served. The portly owner's new cash register went tap-tapping 5 times before he got a chance to say, "Evening, Mr. Meads. Give us a pound of candles, will ye?" Mrs. Meads came in through a parlour at the back in a rustling black dress. She was going to a welfare meeting at the vicar's. She said, "Good evening, Mr. Baines. Hope you're all nicely." A slightly disturbing sight met the eye of Ambrose. The parlour door was open, and he could see a maid in a cap and apron clearing away tea things in the gaily furnished room. The Meads had got a servant. He knew that Meads was extending his business. He had a cheap clothing department now, and he was building a shed out the back with the intention of supplying petrol to casual motorists. But a servant! He picked up his packet of candles and muttered gruffly, "Good evening." Before he had reached the door he heard tap-tapping. His 1 and 2pence had gone into the box. As he swung down the village street, he muttered to himself, "Good, I wish I had his money." 4. When Mrs. Meads returned from the welfare meeting at 8:30, she found Mr. Meads waiting for her in the parlour, and the supper laid. There was cold veal and beetroot, apple pie, cheese, and stout. "I'm sorry I'm late, dear," she said. "That's all right, my love," replied Mr. Meads, not looking up from his newspaper. "We had a lovely meeting. Mrs. Wonicott was there, and Mrs. Beale, and Mrs. Edwin Pilcreek, and Mrs. James, and Ada, and both the Jamesons, and the vicar was perfectly sweet. He made 2 lovely speeches." "Oh, that was nice," said Mr. Meads, trying to listen and read a piquant paragraph about a divorce case at the same time. "I should think you want your supper." "I'm ready when you are, my love." Mr. Meads put down his newspaper, and drawing his chair up to the table began to set about the veal. He was distinctly a man for his victuals. He carved rapidly for her, and less rapidly for himself. From this you must not imagine that he treated his wife meanly. On the contrary, he gave her a large helping. But a close observer could not help detecting that when he carved for himself, he seemed to take rather more interest in his job. Then he rang a little tinkly handbell, and the new maid appeared. "Go into the shop, my dear," he said, "and get me a pot of pickled walnuts from the second shelf on the left, before you come to them bales of calico." The maid went, and Mrs. Meads clucked, "Being a bit extravagant tonight, John." "The labourer is worthy of his hire," quoted Mr. Meads sententiously. He put up a barrage of veal in the forefront of his mouth. He had no back teeth, but managed to penetrate it with an opaque rumble of sound. "Besides, we had a good day today, done a lot of business, passed the stout." "I'm glad to hear it," replied Mrs. Meads. "It's about time things began to improve, considering what we've been through. Mrs. Wonnacott was wearing a biscuit-coloured taffeta with a new lace yoke. She looks smart, but a bit stiff for the welfare to my way of thinking." "Ah," came rumbling through the veal. "Oh, did I tell you Mrs. Mounted was there too? She was wearing her starched linen. No end of a swell she looked." Mr. Meads's eyes lighted with a definite interest at last. Mrs. Mounted was the wife of James Mounted, the proprietor of that handsome hostelry, the Die is Cast. When his long day's work was over, Mr. Meads would not infrequently pop into the Die is Cast for an hour or so before closing time, and have a long chat with Mr. James Mounted. He swallowed half a glass of stout at a gulp, and helped himself liberally to the pickled walnuts which the maid had just brought in. Eyeing the walnuts thoughtfully, he said, "Oh, so she's got into it too, has she?" "Yes, she's really quite a pleasant body. She told me coming down the street that her husband had just bought Boulder's farm over at Pondhurst. He's setting up his son there, who's marrying Kate Staining. Her people have got a bit of money too, so they'll be all right. By the way, we haven't heard from Charlie for nearly 3 weeks." Mr. Meads sighed. Why were women always like that? There was Edie. He was trying to tell her that things were improving, going well, in fact. The shed for petrol and motor accessories was nearly finished. The cheap clothing department was in full swing. He had indulged in pickled walnuts for supper. Her supper, too. And there she must needs talk about Charlie. Everybody in the neighbourhood knew that their son Charlie was up in London, and not doing himself or anybody else any good. And almost in the same breath she must needs talk about old Mounthead's son. Everyone knew that young Mounthead was a promising, industrious fellow. Oh, and so old James had bought him Boulder's farm, had he? That had cost a pretty penny, he knew. Just bought a farm, had he? Not put the money into his business? Just bought it in the way that he, Sam Meads, might buy a gramophone or an umbrella. Pooh! "I don't want no tart," he said, on observing Edie begin to carve it. "No tart?" she exclaimed. "Why, what's wrong?" "Oh, I don't know," he replied. "Don't feel like it. Working too hard, a bit flatulent. I'll go out for a stroll after supper." An hour later he was leaning against the bar of the Die is Cast, drinking gin and water, and listening to Mr. Mounthead discourse on dogs. The bar of the Die is Cast was a self-contained village club. Other cronies drifted in. They were all friends of Mr. Meads and Mr. Mounthead. Mrs. Mounthead seldom appeared in the bar, but there was a potman and a barmaid named Florrie, and somewhere in the rear a cook, 2 housemaids, a scullery maid, a boy for knives and boots, and an ostler. Mr. Mounthead had a victoria and a governess car, as well as a van for business purposes, a brown mare and a pony. He also had his own farm, well stocked with pigs, cattle, and poultry. While taking his guests' money in a sleepy, leisurely way, he regaled them with the rich fruits of his opinions and experiences. Later on he dropped casually that he was engaging an overseer at $400 a year to take his son's place. And Mr. Meads glanced round the bar and noted the shining glass and pewter, the polished mahogany, the little pink and green glasses winking at him insolently. He doesn't know what work is either, suddenly occurred to him. Mr. Mounthead's work consisted mostly in a little bookkeeping and in ordering people about. He only served in the shop as a kind of social relaxation. If he, Sam Meads, didn't serve in his shop himself all day, from early morning till late evening, goodness knows what would happen to the business. Besides, the pettiness of it all. Little bits of cheese, penny tins of mustard, string, weighing out sugar and biscuits, cutting bacon, measuring off ribbons and calico and flannelette. People gossiping all day and running up little accounts it was always hard to collect. But here, oh, the snappy quick profit, everybody paying on the nail, served in a second, and what a profit! Enough to buy a farm for a son as though it was an umbrella. Walking home a little dejectedly later on, he struck the road with his stick and muttered, "Damn that man." 5. Mrs. James Mounthead was rather pleased with her starched Ninon. She leant back luxuriously in the easy-chair, yawned and pressed her hands along the sides of her well-fitting skirt. Gilt bangles round her wrists rattled pleasantly during this performance. A paste star glittered on her ample bosom. She heard James moving ponderously on the landing below. The bar had closed. He came puffily up the stairs and opened the door. "A nightcap, Queenie?" He wheezed through the creaking machinery of his respiratory organs. Mrs. Mounthead smiled brightly. "I think I will tonight, Jem." He went to a cabinet and poured out 2 mixed drinks. He handed his wife one, and raising the other to his lips, said, "Well, here's to the boy." "Here's to James the Second," she replied, and drank deeply. Her eyes sparkled. Mrs. Mounthead was excited. The bangles clattered against the glass as she set it down. "Come and give me a kiss, old dear," she said, leaning back. Without making any great show of enthusiasm, James did as he was bidden. He, too, was a little excited, but his excitement was less amorous than commercial. He had paid nearly £1,200 less for Boulder's farm than he had expected. The news of his purchase was all over the neighbourhood. It had impressed everyone. People looked at him differently. He was becoming a big man, the big man in these parts. He could buy another farm tomorrow, and it wouldn't break him. And the boy was a good boy. He would do well too. A little drink easily affected Mrs. Mounthead. She became garrulous. "I had a good time at the welfare, though some of the old cats didn't like me, I know. What do I care? We could buy the whole lot up if we wanted to, except perhaps the Wonnicotts. Mine was the only frock worth a tinker's cuss. Lord, you should have seen old Mrs. Meads. Looked like a washerwoman on a Sunday. The vicar was ever so nice. He called me madam, and he said he hoped I often come. I gave a £5 to the fund. I didn't tell 'em that I made it backing ring cross for the Nunhead Stakes yesterday. They'd have died." During this verbal explosion, James Mounthead thoughtfully regarded his glass. And he thought to himself, it's a pity Queenie gives herself away sometimes. He didn't particularly want to hear about the welfare. He wanted to talk about James the Second and the plans for the future. He wanted to indulge in the luxury of talking about their success, but he didn't want to boast about wealth in quite that way. He had queer ambitions not unconnected with the land he lived on. He'd not always been in the licensing trade. His father had been a small landed proprietor, a stock breeder, a man of stern, unrelenting principles. From his father he, James Mounthead, had inherited a kind of reverence for the ordered development of land and cattle, an innate respect for the sanctity of tradition, caste, property, and fair dealing. His wife had always been in the licensing trade. She was the daughter of a publican at Pondhurst. As a girl she had served in the bar. All her relations were licensing people. When she had a little to drink, she was apt to display her worst side, to give herself away. James sighed. "Did Mrs. Wonnacott say anything about her husband?" he asked, to change the subject. "You bet she did. Tried to put it across us when I told her about buying Boulder's farm. Said her old man had thought of bidding for it, but he knew it was poor in root crops and the soil was no good for corn, and that Sturgeon neglected the place too long, the old cat. I said, yes, and perhaps it wouldn't be convenient to pay for it now, after having bought a lawn-mower. Ha ha ha! Hey, oh my!" "I shouldn't have said that," mumbled Mr. Mounthead, who knew, however, that anything was better than one of Queenie's violent reactions to quarrelsomeness. "Come on, let's go and turn in, old girl." An hour later James Mounthead was tossing restlessly between the sheets. Queenie's reference to the Wonnacotts had upset him. He could read between what she had said sufficiently to envisage the scene, which he himself deplored. Queenie, of course, had given herself away again to Mrs. Wonnacott. He knew that both the Wonnacotts despised her, and, through her, him. He had probably as much money as Lewis Wonnacott, if not more. He certainly had a more fluid and accumulative way of making it, but there the matter stopped. Wonnacott was a gentleman, his wife a lady. He, James, might have been as much a gentleman as Wonnacott if circumstances had been different. Queenie could never be a lady in the sense that Mrs. Wonnacott was a lady. Wonnacott led the kind of life that he would like to live, a gentleman farmer, with hunters, a little house property, and some sound vested interests. A man with a great knowledge of land, horses, finance, and politics. He loved Queenie in a queer, enduring kind of way. She had been loyal to him, and she satisfied most of his needs. She loved him, but he knew that he could never attain the goal of his vague ambitions with her clinging to his heels. He thought of Lewis Wonnacott sleeping in his white-panelled bedroom with chintz curtains and old furniture, and his wife in the adjoining room, where the bay window looked out on the downs, and the heart of James became bitter with envy. 6. "I don't think I shall attend those welfare meetings any more," remarked Mrs. Lewis Wonnacott, with a slight drawl. She gathered up her letters from the breakfast table and walked to the window. In the garden below, Leach, the gardener, was experimenting with a new mower on the well-clipped lawns. The ramblers on the pergola were at their best. Her husband, in a broad check suit and a white stock, looked up from the Times and said, "Oh, how's that, my dear?" "They are getting such awful people in. That dreadful woman, the wife of Mounthead, the publican, has joined." "Oh, Mounthead's all right. He's not a bad sort. He knows a gelding from a blood mare." "That may be, but his wife is the limit. I happened to say something about the new mower, and she was simply rude. An awful vulgar person, wears spangles, and boasts about the money her husband makes out of selling whisky." "By gad, I bet he does too. I wouldn't mind having a bit of his pub. You see, the Canadian Pacifics are still stagnant.
Lewis, I sometimes wish you wouldn't be so material. You think about nothing but money.
Oh, come, my dear. I'm interested in a crowd of other things which I don't make money out of, too.
For instance?
The land, the people who work on it, horses, cattle, game, the best way to do things for everybody. Besides, ain't I interested in the children? The 2 girls' careers at Bedales, young Ralph at rugby, and going up to Cambridge next year.
You know they're there, but how much interest you take I couldn't say.
What is it you want me to do, my dear?
I think you might bestir yourself to get amongst better people. The girls will be leaving school soon and coming home. We know no one at all in the neighbourhood.
No one at all? Gemini, why, we know everyone.
You spend all your time among horse breeders and cattle dealers and people like Mounthead, and occasionally call on the vicar. But who is there of any importance that we know?
Lord, what do you want? Do you want me to go and call at Crawshay Park and ask Sir Septimus and Lady Letter to come and make up a 4-up bridge?
Don't be absurd. You know quite well that the Letters are entirely inaccessible. He's not only an MP and owner of half the newspapers in the country, but a millionaire. They entertain house parties of ministers and dukes, and even royalty. They can afford to ignore even the country people themselves. But there are others. We don't even know the country.
Who, for instance?
Well, the Burnabys. You met St. John Burnaby at the Constitutional Club 2 or 3 times, and yet you've never attempted to follow it up. They are very nice people and neighbours, and they have 3 boys all in the 20s, and the girl Sheila, she's just a year younger than Ralph.
My word, he's being material now.
It isn't material, it's just thinking of the children.
Women are wonderful, muttered Lewis Wonnacott into his white stock, without raising his head. Mrs. Wonnacott swept to the door. Her thin lips were drawn in a firm, straight line. Her refined, hard little face appeared pinched and petulant. With her hand on the door-handle, she said acidly,
"If you can spare half an hour from your grooms and pigs, I think you might at least do this to please me. Call on Mrs. Burnaby to-day."
And she went out of the room, shutting the door crisply. "Oh, Jiminy Piminy," muttered Mr. Wonnacott. "Jiminy Piminy." He stood up and shook himself. Then, with feline intentness, he walked quickly to the French window, and opening it, he walked down the steps into the garden. All the way to the sunk rose-garden he kept repeating, "Jiminy Piminy." Once amongst the rose-bushes he lighted his pipe. His wife objected to smoking in the house. He blew clouds of tobacco smoke amongst imaginary greenfly. Occasionally he would glance furtively out at the view across the downs. Half buried amongst the elms near Bastard Old Church, he could just see the 5 red gables of the Burnabys' capacious mansion. "I can't do it," he thought. "I can't do it, and I shall have to do it." It was perfectly true that he had been introduced to St. John Burnaby, and had spoken to him once or twice. It was also true that Burnaby had never given any evidence of wishing to follow up the acquaintanceship. Bit of a swell, Burnaby, connected with all sorts of people, member of 6 clubs, didn't race, but went in for golf, and had a shooting-box in Scotland. Some said he had political ambitions, meant to try for Parliament at the next election. He didn't racket around in a check suit and a white stock, and mix with grooms and farmhands. He kept up the flair of the gentleman, a big man, even in the country. He had 2 cars, and 3 acres of conservatories, and peacocks, and a son in the diplomatic service, a daughter married to a bishop.
His wife, too, came of a poor but aristocratic family. Over at the Five Gables they kept 9 gardeners and 20-odd servants. Everything was done tip-top. Lewis Wonnacott turned and regarded his one old man gardener trying the new mower, which Mrs. Mounthead had been so rude about to Dorothy. Poor Dorothy! She was touchy, that's what it was. Of course she did think of the children, no getting away from it. She was ambitious more for them than for herself or himself. She'd given up being ambitious for him. He knew that she looked upon him as a slacker, a kind of cabbage. Well, perhaps he had been. He hadn't accomplished all he ought to. He had loved the land, the feel of horseflesh, the smell of wet earth when the morning dews were on it. He had been a failure. A failure. He was not up to country people. He was unworthy of his wife's ambitions. Jiminy Piminy, it would be a squeeze to send Ralph up to Cambridge next year. He looked across the valley at the 5 red gables among the elms and sighed. "Lucky devil," he murmured. "Damn it all, I suppose I must go." 7. "You don't seem to realise the importance of it," said Gwendolen St. John Burnaby, as her husband leant forward on his seat on the terrace and tickled the ear of Jinx, the Airedale. "A career in the diplomatic service without influence is about as likely to be a success as a performance on a violin behind a soundproof curtain. There's Lal wasting his talents and genius at that wretched little embassy at Porto, and all you've got to do is to drive 3 miles to Crochet Park and put the matter before Sir Septimus." "These things always seem so simple to women," answered St. John a little peevishly. "Well, isn't it true? Do you deny that he has the power?" "Of course he has the power, my dear, but you may not realise the kind of life a man like that lives. Every minute of the day is filled up, all kinds of important things crowding each other out. He's always been friendly enough to me, and yet every time I meet him I have an idea he has forgotten who I am. He deals in movements in which men are only pawns. If I told him about Lal, he would say yes, he would do what he could, make a note of it, and then forget about it directly I turn my back." Mrs. St. John Burnaby stamped her elegant Louis heels. "Is nothing ever worth trying?" "Don't be foolish, Gwen. Haven't I tried? Haven't I ambition?" "For yourself, yes. I am thinking of Lal." "Women always think of their sons before their husbands. He knows I have backed his party for all I'm worth. He knows I'm standing for the constituency next time. When I get elected will be the moment. I shall then have a tiny atom of power. For a man without even a vote in Parliament, do you think Letta is going to waste his time?" "Obstinate," muttered Mrs. Burnaby with metallic clearness. The little lines around the eyes and mouth of a face that had once been beautiful became accentuated in the clear sunlight. The constant stress of ambitious desires had quickened her vitality, but in the process had aged her body before its time. She knew that her husband was ambitious too, but there was always that little something that he lacked in the great moments, just that little special effort that might have landed him among the gods or in the House of Lords. He had been successful enough in a way. He had made money, 100,000 or so in brokerage and dealing indirectly in various manufactured commodities, but he had not even attained a knighthood or a seat in Parliament. His heavy, dark face betokened power and courage, but not vision. He was indeed, as she had said, obstinate. In minnow circles he might appear a Triton, but living within the same county as Sir Septimus Letta, Bah! About to leave him, her movement was arrested by the approach of a butler, followed by a gentleman in a check suit and a white stock, looking self-conscious. Mrs. St. John Burnaby raised her lorgnette. One of these local people, she reflected. On being announced, the gentleman in the check suit exclaimed rapidly, "'Scuse the liberty I take. Neighbours, don't you know? Remember me at the Constitutional, Mr. Burnaby. Thought I'd drop in and pay my respects." St. John Burnaby nodded. "Oh, yes, quite. I remember, Mr. Wonicott." "Oh, yes, of course. How do you do? My wife, Mr. Wonicott." The wife and the Wonicott bowed to each other. There was an uncomfortable pause. At last Mr. Wonicott managed to say, "We live over at Wimpstone, just across the valley. My wife, the girls are at school, boys up at rugby." "Oh, yes, really?" This was Mrs. Burnaby, who was thinking to herself, "The man looks like a dog fancier." "Very good school," said St. John Burnaby. "Hot today, isn't it?" "Yes, it's exceedingly warm." "Do you golf?" "No, I don't golf. I ride a bit." "You must excuse me," said Mrs. St. John Burnaby. "I have got to get a trunk call to London." She fluttered away across the terrace and into the house. Mr. Wonicott chattered away for several minutes, but St. John Burnaby was preoccupied and monosyllabic. The visitor was relieved to rescue his hat at last and make his escape. Walking down the drive, he thought, "It's no good. He dislikes me." As a matter of fact, St. John Burnaby was not thinking about him at all. He was thinking of Sir Septimus Letter, the big man, the power he would like to have been. He ground his teeth and clenched his fists. "Damn it," he muttered, "I will not appeal for young Lal. Let him fight his own battles." 8. On a certain day that summer, when the sun was at its highest in the heavens, Sir Septimus Letter stood by the bureau in his cool library and conversed with his private secretary. Sir Septimus was wearing what appeared to be a ready-made navy serge suit and a low collar. His hands were thrust into his trouser pockets. The sallow face was heavily marked. The strange, restless eyes peered searchingly between dark brows, which almost met in one continuous line. The chin was finely modelled, but not too strong. It was not indeed what is usually known as a strong face. It had power, but of the kind which has been mellowed by the friction of every human experience. It had alert intelligence, a penetrating absorption. Above all things, it indicated vision. The speech and the movements were incisive. The short, wiry body a compact tissue of nervous energy. He listened with the watchful intensity of a dog at a rabbit-hole. Through the door at the end of the room could be heard the distant click of many typewriters. The secretary was saying, "The third reading of the Nationalisation of Paper Industries Bill comes on at 5:30, sir. Bonham will be up, and I do not think you will be called till 7. You will, of course, however, wish to hear what he has to say." "I know what he will say. You can cut that out, Roberts. Get Libby to give me a précis at 6:45. "Very good, sir. And then there will be time after the Associated News Service Board at 4 to see the Minister with regard to this question of packing meetings in East Riding. Lord Lamprey said he would be pleased if I could fix an appointment. He has some information." "Right. What line are Jennings and Castwell taking over this?" "They're trying to sidetrack the issue. They have every unassociated newspaper in the North against you." Well, we've fought them before." "Yes, sir. The pressure is going to be greater this time, but everybody has confidence that you will get them down." The little man's eyes sparkled. Roberts, get through on the private wire to Lambie. No, get through to all of them and make it quite clear this is not to be a party question. They're to work the unctuous rectitude stuff, you know, liberty of the subject and so on. Very good, sir. The car comes at 1:15. You are lunching with Cranmer at Shaun Towers. The Canadian paper interests will be strongly represented there. I will be at Whitehall Court at 3 with the dispatches. It would be advisable, if possible, to get Loeb of the Finance Committee. Oh, and by the way, sir, I had to advise you from Loeb. They have received a cabled report of the expert's opinion from Labrador. There are 2 distinct seams of coal on that land you bought in 07. A syndicate from Buffalo have made an offer. They offer $1.25 million down. What did we pay? 120,000. Don't sell. Very good, sir. Have you seen my wife lately? I have not seen Lady Letter for some days, sir. I believe she is at Harrogate. The little man sighed and drew out a cigarette case, opened it, and offered one to Roberts, who accepted it with an elegant gesture. Then he snapped it to and replaced it in his pocket. Damn it, Roberts, Reeves says I mustn't smoke. Oh dear, only a temporary disability, I trust, sir. Everything is temporary, Roberts. With his hands still in his pockets, he walked abstractedly out of the room. A little ormolu clock in the outer corridor indicated 20 minutes to 1. The car was due at 1:15. 35 minutes. Oh, to escape for only that brief period. Through the glass doors he could see his sister talking to 2 men in golfing clothes, some of the house party. The house party was a perpetual condition at Crawshay. He turned sharply to the right and went through a corridor leading out to the rear of the garage. He hurried along and escaped to a path between 2 tomato houses. In a few moments he was lost to sight. He passed through a shrubbery and came to a clearing. Without slackening his pace, he walked across it and got amongst some trees. The trees of Crawshay Park, his trees. He looked up at the towering oaks and elms. Were they his trees because he had bought them? They were there years before he was born. They would be there years after his death. He was only passing through, a fugitive. Everything is temporary, Roberts. Yes, even life itself. Jennings and Castwell. Of course they wanted to get him down. Were they the only ones? Does one struggle to the top without hurting others to get there? Does one struggle to the top without making enemies? Does one get to the top without suffering and bitterness and remorse? The park sloped down to a low stone wall, with an opening where one could obtain a glorious view across the Weald of Sussex. The white ribbon of a road stretched away into infinity. As he stood there, he saw a dark, swarthy figure clamber down a bank and stand hesitating in the middle of the road. He was a tramp, with a stubbly red beard nearly concealing his face, and a filthy black-green suit. In his hand he carried a red handkerchief containing his worldly belongings, a doorknob, a portion of a foot rule, a tin mug stolen from a workhouse, some date-stones, an onion, the shutter of a camera, and 2 empty matchboxes. Sir Septimus did not know this fact. He merely regarded the tramp as an abstraction. He observed him hesitate, exchange a word with a field labourer, look up at the sky, hunch his shoulders, and suddenly set out with long swinging strides down the white road. Whither? There stirred within the breast of the millionaire a curious, wistful longing. Oh, to be free! To be free! To walk across those hills without a care, without a responsibility.
The figure with its easy gait fascinated him. The dark form became smaller and smaller, swallowed up in the immensity of nature. With a groan, Sir Septimus Letter buried his face in his hands and murmured, "Lucky devil, lucky devil. Oh God, if I could die!" End of The Octave of Jealousy